most of these stories. Now, she's certainly someone who we've looked at and we've talked about. She's the mother of Isaac, that child of promise, and she's been involved in some things, but they're mostly negative. She's the one that laughs when she hears she's going to have a child in her old age. She goes along with the lie of Abraham, not once, but twice when she says, I'm his sister. She showed a lack of faith when there was a famine and they went down into Egypt instead of following God and trusting in him. She is the one that encouraged her husband to go into Hagar in order to conceive a child because she doubted that she could ever do what God said she was going to do. She is the one that was angry and bitter and jealous towards Hagar when she had a child because Abraham did what she asked him to do. So as often as Sarah comes up, it seems to be that she is cast in a negative light. And I kind of feel bad for Sarah. You know, if you think about it, I think Sarah's really just a good picture to us of the human life. She is a story of someone, to me, who is very human. Sarah, to me, is somebody who probably does a lot of the same things you and I would have done. Maybe not the whole Hagar and Abraham thing, but in a lot of other ways. I mean, have we ever scoffed at the thought of something impossible being done? Yeah, God told her it was going to happen, but let's be real, it was impossible. And she thought, yeah, right. Have we ever thought, yeah, right, it's something that God has said he was going to do, or something miraculous we'd hoped for? Have we ever shown a lack of faith? Have we ever doubted God? Have we ever resorted or connived or done something that we knew we shouldn't have done in order to try to bring about something good? I'm not justifying it in any way, but I think with Sarah, we get the good, the bad, and the ugly. We get her exactly as she was. You know, Moses, who wrote the book of Genesis, he didn't go back and try to clean her up or erase out parts that didn't tell a good story. I think Sarah was just very human, and because of that, I think you and I can learn from her life. That's one of the cool things about the Bible. Other than the Trinity, everybody else was a flawed human, and so are we. And so they're people that we can relate to. They're people we can look at and learn from. So in chapter 23, we're going to look at Sarah at the end of her life, but then through that, I want to go back and maybe hit a few things that we have skipped over with the life of Sarah. So if you're in chapter 23, it begins by ingloriously informing us that she dies. Chapter 23 opens by saying, and Sarah was 127 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah. And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, the same as Hebron in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. That's all we get. All this with Sarah, all these years, and all we get is, and Sarah died. There's nothing ceremonious about it. It doesn't even tell us how it happened. It just says she died. And so we don't know how or why. It doesn't even appear that Abraham was with her. If you read it, it says he came to mourn for her, like he wasn't even there when it happened. So it was probably something unexpected. Maybe she had a massive heart attack, or maybe something just happened where Abraham was out trying to find something to eat, maybe out killing some food, or maybe he was out doing some work or something. He comes back and he finds that she's not there. Now, perhaps in God's mercy, he took her out quickly. If she was laying there, getting slowly worse and worse and worse, it'd be hard to imagine Abraham wouldn't be by her side. But that's all it tells us. She died. Abraham comes to mourn for her. Abraham loved his wife very much, and he should have. She was by his side through quite a bit. Life was good for Abram and Sarai. Remember that? He just tells her one day, we're leaving. Where are we going? I don't know. God just told us we're going. And she was by his side through thick and thin, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse. I mean, all the things we make our marriage vows. And she was with him all the way. We see he mourns for her. He loved his wife. But then there's this interesting thing that takes place here. Think about Abraham, who's in Canaan. This is the promised land. And yet he's a stranger. He's living where God told him to go, but he owns none of the land. This is where God sent him, but where's he supposed to bury his wife? He doesn't own a tomb. He doesn't own any land. And so he begins to ask around saying, can I buy anything from anyone? I need a place to bury my wife. And there's this very interesting exchange that takes place here, beginning in verse 11. It's kind of odd as we read it, but I'll explain a little bit of this in a minute. But in verse 11, we meet this man by the name of Ephron. Abraham says that I'll pay for your tomb. So in verse 11, he says, no, my Lord, hear me. He says, I will give you this field and the cave that is there. I will give it to you. In the presence of the sons of my people, I will give it to you to bury your dead. So Abraham bowed down himself before the people of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the audience of the people of the land, saying, but if you will give it to me, I pray you, hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it, and then I will bury my dead there. So he says, I'll give it to you for free. Abraham says, no, I'm going to pay for it. Verse 14, Ephron answered Abraham, saying, my Lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 pieces of silver. What is that between me and you? Therefore, take it to bury your dead. And Abraham hearkened unto Ephron, and Abraham weighed out to him the silver, which he had named in the audience of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver. And so Abraham pays for the field. It's kind of funny. Abraham's saying, look, I'll buy it. No, don't buy it, just take it. No, I'm going to buy it. No, take it. But by the way, it is worth 400 pieces of silver. But no, what's money between you and me? Just take it. And so Abraham says, no, I'm going to buy it. And he counts out the money, and he does it. Have you ever negotiated like that? You know, you're kind of hoping somebody, like, no, I got the check, I got it, and you reach real slow and you see if they beat you to it. No, I tried. And that kind of sounds like what they're doing there. But this was actually a custom in that culture. You didn't just do shrewd business. You would never just say, oh, you want that? Yeah, that'll be 400 pieces of silver, please, pay up. It didn't work like that. It was very polite. No, don't be ridiculous. It's yours, take it. And then you would casually mention the asking price and then insist once again that they don't pay. But what was also common is to inflate the price, to honestly tell somebody twice what you want for it, and then expect them to haggle a little bit. Like Abraham was going to come back and say, 400, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 200. And maybe they could barter back and forth. But Abraham doesn't do that. He knows the custom. The guy says 400. Abraham says, you got yourself a deal. On the spot, he pulls out this money. Abraham was very wealthy. He had been blessed by God. And Abraham knew this was his land anyway, and he was not going to haggle over the price. When he gets this overinflated sum of money, probably made this guy's day. This guy got twice what the field was worth. And that's it. Abraham now purchases this cave, and he buries Sarah there, and that's it. That's the end of her life. And so that's where we're going to stop tonight in Genesis. But I just want to point out a few quick things about Sarah that I think you and I can learn from her. And they're not going to come from Genesis, but we're going to see twice what she's brought up in the New Testament. So if you take notes, first of all, number one, we see Sarah, we see her fidelity to Abraham. Listen to what Peter said about her in 1 Peter 3, verse 6. You see it on the screen there. He says, Sarah obeyed Abraham, and she called him Lord. Now, that might be kind of a funny verse. Some of you ladies, she called him Lord. Hang on a second. What are you laughing at? Now, the other night we were eating dinner, and Alicia said something about, where we going to eat or something. And she said, hey, I get to pick where we eat. And I said, you better call me Lord, woman. I said, you're going to be convicted on Sunday night if you don't obey me and let me pick. But no, she didn't. We ate where she wanted. But that's how you compromise when you're married. You do what she wants you to do. But it's a joke. But you see, though, it says she obeyed her husband. Now, some of you wives, you might say, I can't stand when they talk about this stuff. I'm not going to obey my husband. He's not my boss. And some of you husbands, you might be sitting there saying, preach it, preacher. My wife needs to obey me a little bit more. But let's talk about what is the reality of this passage. What does this verse mean when it says she obeyed her husband? This is an important verse. She obeyed, that is, she yielded to his authority as the head of the home. Now look, I didn't make this up, okay? This wasn't my idea. But God said that the husband is to be the head of the home. Now, Stephanie Goodale at Philippi, if y'all know Stephanie, this was this thing she said, and I thought it made so much sense, but she would always say, anything with two heads is a freak, and anything with no heads is dead. You think about that. You have to have a head. The home, there has to be a head of the home. There has to be a head at your office, your CEO, your boss, the president. There has to be someone in charge there. There has to be a head in the home. There has to be a head in the church, which is Jesus. But there has to be a head of anything. If there's no head, it's dead. But if there's two heads, it's a freak. You can't have co-rulers. It doesn't work. People have tried it. Countries have tried it with monarchies. I've seen churches where they try to have co-pastors. It doesn't work. There has to be a head. Now, God ordained it this way, where the husband was the head of the home. This is not chauvinistic. This is not demeaning to women. This is not elevating men. It's just the way that God set it up. But what does it mean to be the head? What does it mean to be an authority? It's not being a dictator at all. It's more being a director. Nowhere is the woman told that she is a doormat. Nowhere is she told just to lay down and shut up and enjoy it. When it says she obeyed her husband, guys, it doesn't mean you walk in the house and say, "Woman, make me a sandwich." That's not what this is talking about. The woman does not exist to be a slave. She does not exist to be a maid. She does not exist to be the cook and the cleaner or whatever we might think. That's not at all what this has to do with. When it says she obeyed Abraham, it doesn't mean that he gave her this long list of rules or chores and she was required to do it. But what it does mean is that she did yield to his authority. We have to find this balance, this fine line between submission and silence. I've come to realize that 9 times out of 10, when my wife tells me something, she's right. There you go. The insight that she has, the things that she says, "I wouldn't do it that way. Are you sure you want to do that?" And when I listen to her, and when I take that into account, and if I do what she suggested, 9 times out of 10, I'm glad I did. And I say 9 times out of 10. I can't think of a whole lot of times where I can regret taking her advice and doing what she suggested that I do, because she has this keen sense of understanding. I said that to my brother the other day when he was here. I was saying, he said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Well, quite frankly," I said, "Alicia said I should, and she's always right when she says that." And this is what my brother said. He said, "Don't women have such great insight?" He said, "It's the same way with my wife. So when I listen to her, I'm always glad that I did." And I think that for a husband and wife, I think God brings people together that way. And so to say that she obeyed her husband does not mean that she never speaks up. It doesn't mean she never gives advice. It doesn't mean she can't have an opinion. She should. And any good husband would welcome that input. That's why I said he's a director and not a dictator. Any director wants to hear advice, wants to hear what people have to say, and any good director would come to recognize and appreciate any good advice he can get. Sarah was never somebody that was just a doormat, a slave, a cook, or anything like that. But she obeyed her husband. That is, she yielded his authority. She recognized the fact that God spoke to Abraham, and Abraham spoke to her. And as the husband being the head of the home, it comes with a large responsibility. Women, you might say, "It's not fair." Sometimes I wish she was the head of the home. That way she had to make some of those tough decisions, and she has to bear the consequences. It comes with a big responsibility. It's not like it's a fun thing. And many times, because Abraham messed up, he bore the responsibility. But there's a partnership between the husband and wife, and we need to realize what Ephesians 5:22 says. In fact, I'm going to turn there if you'd like to do that. Because there's an important verse we need to see together. As many times we might hear someone say that a wife should be submissive, but we need to get the full picture of what that looks like. Ephesians 5:22, it says, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body." I hear those verses used quite a bit, but back up and look at verse 21. Verse 21 says, "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of the Lord." Submit to each other. That means that the husband is also to submit to the wife in the fear of God. Submission is not a one-way street. Women don't have a monopoly on submission. Oh, they need to submit. The men are told to submit as well in the fear of God. I must submit to my wife at times. And so while the husband, though, is given the title of head of the home, he is never put in place of being the sole voice or the dictator in the home. It's a partnership. The husband is the head, but should partner with his wife. All married couples need to seek to find that balance and strengthen that relationship where they love each other, respect each other, and submit to each other, doing it all in the fear of God. She was faithful to her husband, Abraham, and I think Sarah is to be applauded for that, and that's why Peter specifically mentions her. But not only was we see her fidelity to Abraham, number two, that we see that she is family to us. We're part of Sarah's family. With that same verse still on the screen, the second half of it, it says that you, the church, you are her children. If, it says, you do good and you do not fear anything that is frightening. You are her children. I am her son. You are her daughters and sons. And a better translation of that, instead of you are her children, should be you became her children. Most people agree that should be translated a little bit differently. We become her children. What does that mean? Well, Eve is the mother of all. But Sarah, spiritually, is the mother of all. In Adam and Eve, they say, we're all here. But spiritually speaking, we are children of Abraham and Sarah if we are of the faith. See, for so long, Jews said, well, hey, I'm a son of Abraham. I'm a daughter of Abraham. I'm justified in God's sight. I am right with him because I can trace my lineage back to Abraham and Sarah. Look, we can all trace our lineage back to Adam and Eve, right? But spiritually, we have to become children of Abraham and Sarah. As Adam and Eve are the mother of all living, Abraham and Sarah are the spiritual parents of all believers. Being a child of Abraham by birth benefits us nothing. But spiritually and symbolically, if we put our faith in the God of the covenant that Abraham and Sarah put their faith in, then we become their children. The question to you then today is not, are you a child of Eve? We all are. Are you a child of Sarah? Spiritually, have you put your faith in their God? But what does it say if you do well? You become her child if you do well. It requires something on our part. You're not automatically her child, but you are if. If you do good and you do not fear anything frightening. It's kind of an interesting passage. So wait, what if I'm afraid of spiders? Is that what that means? What does this mean if you don't fear anything? You can be her child. We have to do good, but what it means about that verse about fear, this was cultural. There were many women in this culture who were married to men who did not believe. And Peter was writing to a church filled with women whose husbands weren't there. This was a pagan society. Many of the women were saved, and they couldn't talk their husbands out of their rituals and their religions. And so the church was filled with these women whose husbands would not come with them. And many of them were scared. You want me to submit to my ungodly husband? You want me to listen to this man who's part of these occultic practices? Some of the stuff we looked at this morning. And they were fearful of that. They were scared of what submission to an ungodly man would look like. Maybe some of you are wondering that right now. Do I need to submit to my husband when he's wrong? What about if he's drunk and he's telling me to do something? Do I have to listen to him? What if he doesn't love the Lord? What if he's not in church? To what extent should I submit? Peter says, you do well, but don't be afraid. At the beginning of that chapter, in 1 Peter chapter 3, where we're looking in the first verse, he talks about wives submitting to their husbands, but he says, you might actually, if your husband's an unbeliever, you might win him to Christ by your conduct without saying a word. Now, we certainly need to use our words. We certainly need to preach the message of Jesus. But there's some times when you submit and you just do something you don't want to do, something you think I'm not required to do, but if you do it and you do it with a smile on your face, you might just win him over by your own conduct without ever saying a word. He's saying, look, don't be afraid. You believe in God. We are the bride of Christ. He is the bridegroom, the most important groom. And so while it might not always be easy, and I'm talking to the ladies for just a minute here, while it might not always be easy, by you doing it, by doing what's tough and by what seems wrong, I'm not talking about sinful, but if we do those things, we might just win the lost. I'd love to hear someone say, you know what, my wife, because she always had a smile, she didn't nag me, she wasn't in my face about it, she slowly wore me down, and that's why I'm in church today. We can do that. You can do that. Don't be afraid, is what Peter's saying. Do well. Do what they say. Submit to them without saying a word. You can win them over. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about anything ungodly, anything immoral, anything illegal, okay? If your husband wants you to go rob a bank with him, you don't have to submit to that authority, all right? Anything at all that you know is wrong, you stand your ground and you say, I love you, I'm not doing that. That goes against what my God says to do. But sometimes by just enduring it, by just putting up with it, by showing Him love, by putting others before yourself, we can do it. Now, guys, I want to talk to you for a minute because I'm talking to those ladies that maybe you're in that situation. But every one of us, we can do that with our boss at work. When I worked for FedEx Ground, I had a manager that absolutely hated my guts. He would call me horrible things. In fact, at one point I considered bringing a lawsuit against him for sexual harassment, but I chose not to do it. I won't tell you all the stuff that he said, but when I say sexual harassment, you can probably guess some of the things that he would say to me, some of the names he would call me. But you know what? When I moved to come up here, my brother was in management there, and he ended up, my brother said, why do you hate him so much? My brother asked him, he told my brother, he said, I know he's a Christian and I wanted to see him snap. He said, I don't like Christians and I wanted to see him lose it. And so he would poke at me and prod me and call me horrible things to get under my skin. Because if we talked about hypocrites in Sunday school, if I ever lost it and went off on him or cursed at him or did something, then he'd say, I knew it. They're all just hypocrites. I knew it. And that's what he wanted me to do. Maybe you're in that same boat by just putting up with it and letting him curse at me sometimes, letting him call me names I can't repeat sometimes. I was hoping that by just being a good employee and taking it, that maybe I would wear him down. I have no idea where he is today or what he's up to, but my only hope is that he saw Christ in me as I would turn the other cheek. I'm not patting myself on the back in any way. In fact, one time he didn't hear what I said back to him, and I was thankful the building was loud. All right, I'll admit that to you. So I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but what I am saying is it's not easy, and it's not just wives to husbands. We can all do this in front of the ungodly, submit in the sight of God, and maybe by our chaste conduct, Peter says, we can win them without saying a word. It's tough, but we can do it. And that's what Peter encouraged these women to do. Sarah did that, and we should applaud her for it. Finally, number 3, and I think most importantly, we see her faithfulness to God. She was faithful to the one that it mattered most. Hebrews 11, in the hall of faith, it brings up Sarah. All her faults, all her flaws, all the things we know she did, and she gets here in the hall of faith. By faith, Sarah herself, it says, received the power to conceive. Talking about Isaac. When she was old in her age. It says that she considered him faithful who had promised. She's in Hebrews 11 because she considered God to be faithful when He promised. You might say, wait, that's not how it happened. I've read the account. Remember? She laughed. And then God even said, remember the 3 strangers, one of them was Jesus, and He said to Abraham, why'd your wife laugh in the tent? And then she denied it. I didn't laugh. Not only did she laugh at God's promise, she lied about laughing. And the author of Hebrews seems to think that she thought God was faithful. She had faith in God. Like, the author of Hebrews must have missed what I read in Genesis, right? Because when we look at that, we say, she didn't consider Him faithful. She laughed. She scoffed. She denied her lack of faith. But we know, Sarah, we can read, we know you messed up. The author of Hebrews must have missed that, right? Didn't miss it at all. Listen, this is the beauty of God. She is called faithful. She makes it in Hebrews 11, the hall of fame for Old Testament Christians, the hall of faith. She makes it in Hebrews 11 for believing in God, but we know that she had a lapse in faith. Not just when God said she'd conceive, but twice before when she said, he's my brother. Twice, now at least 3 times we know of her faith faltered. But here is the beauty of God. When it was all said and done, and when Sarah was in the presence of God and her life on earth was over, when God wrote the book, he chose to call her faithful. He didn't bring up her faults. He didn't dwell on the times she messed up. He called her faithful. We serve a God that remembers how we finish, not the times we messed up along the way. We serve a God who, as often as we confess, will separate as far as the east is from the west all of our mistakes. Can you identify with Sarah tonight? Have you ever messed up, laughed at God, thought, there's no way, that's impossible? Have you ever been there? Well, guess what? God is not holding that over your head tonight. He didn't hold it over Sarah's. Thousands of years later, when the book was written about her, she was called faithful, the one who we know fell short. And I believe we all can identify with her as people who have fallen short. Therefore, we all should be able to rejoice that we serve a God who remembers us, not for the mistakes along the way, but for how we finished when we put our faith in Him. Her faith was weak early on. Remember what I told you before, though? She didn't have a Bible to read. She couldn't read about all the prophets and all the patriarchs and all the great things God had done. She couldn't read about God parting the Red Sea. She couldn't read about God feeding the prophet with the mouth of a raven. She couldn't read about these things. Neither could Abraham. They were learning along the way. After that child was born, when she did what God said she was going to do, when the impossible happened, her faith grew. And the times that she had faltered no longer mattered. James says that once Abraham believed, it was counted to him as righteousness. He was viewed as righteous in the eyes of God because of his faith. And even though Sarah is not mentioned in that account, we understand that she was as well. She believed in God. Her faith was strengthened with the conception and the birth of Isaac, and her faith grew tremendously. And once she believed, it was accounted unto her as righteousness. Well, what does the Bible say about us? When God looks at us, what does He see? Does He see the times we've messed up? Does He see the mistakes that we've made? Does He see our worst days? No, He sees the righteousness of Jesus when He looks at us. Because at the cross, the one who knew no sin became our sin. And Paul would later write that we put on, clothe ourselves in, the righteousness of Jesus. The great exchange, His righteousness for our sin. The Father turned His back on the Son because He was so wrapped up in our sin, in Sarah's lack of faith, in our lack of faith, and everything else. God looked at His Son, saw that sin, and turned His back. And now when He looks at us, He sees the righteousness of Jesus, and He says, well done, good and faithful servant. He says of Sarah, she considered him faithful because she believed, and now she's viewed as righteous. When you and I believe in Christ, when we believe in Jesus, we are viewed as righteous. Aren't you glad to serve a God that looks at us and doesn't see the sin, but sees the Savior, sees Jesus through us? I hope you can celebrate that fact today and say, I know I'm saved not because of any good thing I've done, but because I have the righteousness of Jesus. Look, Sarah was a good wife. She was a good mother as far as we can tell. She was a good servant of God. We know she wasn't perfect, but we know overall she did well. We need to remember her that. We might be more inclined to say, wait, but she did this or she did that. We need to view Sarah the way God views her, as righteous. But most importantly, we need to view ourselves the way God views us, as righteous, if you're a Christian. And I said that Wednesday night, and I know a lot of you guys are in Awana and not here, but on Wednesday night, I talked about that same mindset, that we need to view ourselves not as sinners, but as saints. What do we expect sinners to do? Sinners sin. If we call ourselves saints, Sonny and I just had this conversation too. We call ourselves saints, what do we expect to do? We hold ourselves to a higher standard. We live like what we believe we are. God has called you a saint. He's adopted you as a child. You are His, and He sees you as righteous. If we view ourselves as that, it might make us straighten our back a little bit, walk with a sense of confidence because of who we are, not the mistakes we've made. So Christian, understand how God sees you and who you are and live like it. If you're not a Christian, put your faith in Christ today. Your works can't save you. Trade your works for the righteousness of Christ. It's the only way to be justified in His sight. So I'm going to ask you to stand tonight where you are, maybe by looking at the life of Sarah, look at just a few of these simple things. Maybe you see something where you say, God, I need to do a little bit better at that. God, would you help me to be that wife? Or would you help me to be that one that can submit? Or would you help me to show the unsaved world around me who you are? Or maybe tonight you realize, I haven't been saved. I'm not clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. Maybe He's laid something on your heart tonight. I'm going to pray and just invite you to come. Maybe you want to come kneel here and pray. Maybe you want to pray where you are or go to someone else. But if the Lord leads you to do something, please obey Him. Father, I want to pray for your church tonight. I want to pray if there's anything that we need to do a better job of doing, Lord, I pray you would convict us to do it. I pray that we'd follow through with it, promise it to you. Maybe there's one here, though, that's not a Christian. Maybe they've tried to save themselves through their works. Whatever the case is, I pray they'd step out, come forward, and just say, I need to be saved. Lord, if there's anything else in anyone's heart, I pray in these next few minutes we would get serious with you, and I ask this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Sing number